Okay, so the board is reconvening from in open session again from a closed session that we just concluded. So welcome to our at-home audience, I guess. And we'll move on with the next agenda item, which is approval of minutes. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the August 25th, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the first closed session of the August 25th, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the second closed session of the August 25th, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved. Second. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We check to see if there's anyone just that. Okay. Next item is public comment, and there is no public comments tonight, so we can move on to the consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Number 1, personnel recommendations: Jill Hawkins, part-time secretary, Miller School. Number 2, appointment of hearing officer. And number 3, appointment of non-discrimination coordinators, complaint manager.
So moved.
Second.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Ms. Strohmeyer,
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong,
Yes.
Ms. Conover,
Yes.
Ms. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Redonio,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Ms. Coyle.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. We will move on to the discussion information portion of the meeting, and the first topic is the crisis plan.
So included in your board book are this is the information related to the crisis plan for the school district. There's also the annual review report. Every year, school districts are required to have a meeting that includes the police department, fire department, building administrators. And then we review the prior year's drills, get feedback from police and fire on how they were performed, and then also any suggestions for improvements for the upcoming year. Typically, we don't make this information public because some of the information is in the case of a crisis, and we want our staff and students to be aware of what we need to do, but not necessarily the general public. This year is a little different, obviously. The state has not suspended drills, so fire drills, weather drills, intruder drills, but when districts are remote learning, they can postpone drills. And so depending upon when we do resume in-person learning, the schedule of drills will have to modify those the schedule so that we get them done before the end of the school year.
Any questions on the crisis plan? Okay, next discussion item is presentation of monthly financial statements.
The June financial statements are presented for your review. During the month of June, the district received $389,000 from the state, and there's $181,000 of fiscal year 20 payments vouchered, but still haven't received at that time. We did receive 2 installments of the 2019 property tax levy in the amount of $12.2 million during the month, and total property taxes collected to date for the 2019 levy as of June 30th were $12.5 million, which was a 50.64% collection rate. The prior 2 years, we received 50.57 and 52.69%. So we typically receive between 49.5% and 50.5% of our levy by June 30th. So we received just slightly more than that. And again, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact the district's operations, the economy, unemployment, and our financial condition. Revenues in the Ed Fund were comparable to the prior year averages. We received $204,000 of fiscal year 20 payments, and there are about $45,000 of payments vouchered but not released. In the Operations and Maintenance Fund, the revenues were comparable to prior year. We did receive the $50,000 school maintenance project grant, and that was deposited in the Life Safety Fund. That money is going to be used for projects in the Life Safety Fund. It is a matching grant, so we must expend $100,000 for projects in order to retain that $50,000. And we're working on getting those things put together at the next board meeting. Hopefully we'll have something from Steve Cashman for some of those projects to get started on that. Obviously, if our projects came in at less than $100,000, we'd have to pay some money back, but we had anticipated them costing more than $100,000. In the Transportation Fund, again, our revenues fluctuate from year to year based on the timing of state payments and also based on the reimbursement rates, because we are reimbursed different amounts for special ed, transportation versus regular ed, and they're prorated differently, and our dollar amounts change from year to year. So it's really hard to make comparisons from one year to the next. But we did receive $135,000 of fiscal year 20 payments. That was for the third quarter mandated categorical. The state still owes us for the fourth quarter, and that amount is $136,000. Expenditures in the Ed and Tort funds were comparable to the prior year averages. And again, in the O&M fund, they vary from year to year. The O&M fund was 82.19% spent to date. Last year it was 91.03% spent to date last year. Again, some factors contributing to this reduced spending are lower operating costs because of the pandemic. Obviously, we did not have students in the building and staff for several months, so our utilities were lower. We also have not settled the WCMA contract, so salaries were lower. We've had a couple resignations. Overtime, the rentals then stopped, so a lot of our overtime in athletics, so a lot of the overtime that we incur for weekend events and things like that did not occur as well. So that's part of the reason why we look better there. And then in the transportation fund, the expenditures are comparable to last year and then the prior 3-year average. But again, timing of receipt of invoices can make that change from year to year. Also in the transportation fund, spending will be skewed this year because of the COVID-19 shutdown and payment adjustments with our transportation contractors. So if you recall, we did enter into an agreement with Westway to pay for March and April at 80% of our normal rate. And then May, we went down to 37%. Our special education vendor was looking for a similar agreement, but a lot of different constraints on it. And we were not able to come to an agreement on the contract language. So we did not incur those costs for our special ed transportation. So that's, again, why some of our expenditures were lower than anticipated there. Then the investments are presented for you. And at the end of June, obviously because we received the large tax distributions, our fund balance goes up again in June. So we had $20.6 million invested in interest earning accounts. We earned $312,000 worth of interest overall in all of our accounts for the year, which was much greater than anticipated because of rates. We'll see a significant decline in that for this upcoming year. Student activity account balances are attached. I also, on the lunch report, There's a couple new line items for this year. There's one called administrative reimbursement and meal/operational reimbursement. Those two reimbursements are for the type of meal program that we did during the COVID meal distributions. So they weren't the normal National School Lunch Program. They were a different type of program. And so we just wanted to keep track of those separately so we could see what type of revenue we had from those. Because our National School lunch and our breakfast program revenues are lower than anticipated, but we have these two revenues in its place. And then I also put together two fund balance summaries. One of the actual fund balance, and again, this is on a cash basis. When the auditors are finished with the audit, these will be adjusted slightly for modified accrual entries that are made. But then I also have a fund balance summary with designations, and you received this one in your board packet, in your board book. So what I did, one of the things the auditors will be doing this year, because we did receive the Hackbrush donation and that those monies were deposited in the ed fund, we need to keep track of that separately. So I took the ending fund balance and subtracted out the balance in that Hackbrush donation account. So that was the $250,000 plus the interest that account has earned to date. So that balance changed from $11 million to $10.8 million. So a deficit of $76,000. And then in the O&M fund, we're gonna designate those TIF funds this year as well. So $156,000 so that we can see what the fund balance is, because the TIF funds can only be used for renovations at Manning. And so you can see we did, in those couple funds, did have deficit spending. Again, we had a little bit of deficit spending in the tort fund. We are better off than we had projected. Again, we have contracts that were not settled, so salaries and some of our benefits were a little bit different. We had some unfilled positions this year, and so all of those things combined made our position look better than we had anticipated. And also keep in mind, as we settle those contracts, we'll have greater expenses in the upcoming year. So we just need to keep that in mind. Does anybody have additional questions for me?
The contract with the special ed service, that's Sunrise,
Mm-hmm.
is that going to affect us in the future, or do we not know?
We're working on another, as a group of DuPage districts that go through SACID, we're working on a contract amendment for them. So they have come back with similar things, and last year, all districts were kind of doing their own thing, and some people paid, some didn't. There were varying amounts, percentages that districts paid and stuff. So we're trying to, as a group, come together with that, and we'll be presenting that information at the next board meeting. So
Good.
that,
Cool.
but again, there's lead times, and these companies have obviously, furloughed their staff and need to be able to bring them back and things like that. So there could be an impact overall, whether we paid or not.
Kim, I have a question, but actually it's for you, Kevin. It's about the Hackbrush donation. I
Mhm.
remember at the time a committee was formed with you and the former board president, and that committee was going to be like an oversight committee to see where that money was being spent. Is somebody else from the board going to offer to donate their time to be on that committee? Are we looking to still have that committee? Do we want to still have that committee? So I guess that would be my questions.
Yes, we're still going to have the committee. And if there's a board member who would want to be a part of that committee, we can add that person to the committee. We had a couple meetings last spring, or last fall, was it? And then obviously we were derailed, like many things, with the COVID-19. So we will be resuming those meetings and identifying projects to spend those dollars on.
Could you remind the board who is on that committee right now?
Right now, it's Jack Balderman, the principal, myself, and then Lori Rasmuth, who's a science teacher at the high school, and Jamie Mahmood, who's a special ed teacher at the high school. They're both also alumni of Westmont High School, and they knew Mrs. Hackbush. So, we thought that would be nice to have them on the committee as well.
Okay.
So I don't know if we need to pick anyone at this time, but if there's somebody who has an interest, you can let me or Kevin know, and we can work with it from there. Otherwise, the committee's work can just move forward. When it comes time for that, there'll be a recommendation. Will that come to the board, or will some of it come to the board and some of it not? I'm not sure how an expenditure from a fund like this takes place.
It would come to the board for board approval before it was spent.
So it would be, if there were multiple items, you would bring just a plan, basically.
Right.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll move forward with the next topic then, which is COVID-19 protocols. And Dana, is this a topic that you requested?
I did. So as we move towards talking through hybrid options, and right now we're getting small groups of children back in school this week, I was just wanting to bring forth a discussion item on if we need an official handbook on procedures. One difficult thing with COVID is that procedures and protocols need to change with new information. And so we definitely want to be flexible as new guidelines come up. But there was a email to the board about a procedural question from an employee, and it kind of brought to mind this topic, if we need to make sure that we're all on the same page across the district with our procedures and what training is going to look like. Certainly I know that there's been a lot of discussion, Kevin, and training has already occurred, but just a little bit more of a formal official need. What are your thoughts on that, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with it. We already have protocols in place for the cleaning of our buildings. We do have procedures in place if somebody's exposed to COVID, if somebody is test positive. So we do have those procedures in place. So it's just a matter of, we can pull that all together into one shared document. And then also, as you suggested, Dana, it does have to be fluid as we receive additional information. But I can pull all those things together, and we can have that at the next board meeting for the board to review, and providing other suggestions.
Are you thinking of this being more of an online handbook, so when changes are necessary, it can be updated frequently and just kind of as a resource for staff and or parents?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking of the parent aspect. I think as parents go back, they'll want to know what clearly are the procedures and protocols, and if there's any miscommunication or disagreement, we can always refer back to an official source.
No, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, any other comments, questions about that topic? Okay, we'll move on to student attendance and engagement.
And so the board had asked for information about student attendance and engagement. And what I have for you is the attendance since we started remote learning. And as you can see from the data, our current attendance compared to our historical average, we're pretty close to where we normally are for historical average. A little bit lower at junior high and the high school, but still very close to it. With regards to the student engagement piece, and then if the experience of any academic slide due to COVID-19, the student engagement, when I reviewed this with the principals, we are allowing some flexibility for students because, again, of the unusual circumstances, and Sometimes the parent needs to support the child at home. And so the buildings are typically allowing some flexibility as to when assignments are completed. And so it's difficult to do engagement in real time. And so by the next board meeting on the 22nd, we'll have some data that I can share with regards to the student engagement piece. And then also the buildings are currently doing assessments of students to see where they're at academically, and if there is an academic slide, and that information will be presented at the August or the September 22nd meeting as well.
Any questions or comments on that?
Quick question on attendance, Kevin. This is Jess. How are the different schools taking attendance? Are they all just doing it via synchronous Zoom classes, or is it being done differently in the different buildings?
No, it's being done with the synchronous Zoom classes.
Okay.
And so then even if, in some cases, if there's synchronous in the morning, synchronous in the afternoon, they're taking attendance at both times.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just wondering that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the attendance is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very impressed with those numbers,
Yeah.
especially the Miller 100% for kindergarten
Yeah.
and first grade remote learners. That's pretty
It's
amazing.
pretty, yeah.
And I agree that we need flexibility. Certainly a kindergarten student whose parent or elementary students who parent may not be home during the day are going to need some flexibility. Our special needs students who might need some parental assistance. My desire and accountability is not to make things so rigid in a very
Sure.
difficult time for parents, but it's always good to have a good understanding of where we're at and to celebrate our wonderful attendance and the achievements that we've made
Sure.
as a district.
Definitely.
Okay, anything else on that topic? Okay, next topic, update on 2020-2021 school year.
Okay. And Jeremy, this is why I'm going to share my screen. So is it up there, Jeremy?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So to provide the board with an update on the 2020-21 school year as we're planning for transitioning to hybrid. Again, I always want to begin with the fact that, right now we're in phase 4 and what the parameters of phase 4 are. And then what phase 5 is. And the reality is, again, that we'll probably be spending this school year in phase 4. As always, just to reiterate our guiding principles, it's the health and safety of our students and staff that's our priority. We want to make sure that we have a meaningful, engaging academic experiences, that we're focused on the social emotional needs of our students. We're looking for consistency and stability for our students and staff. And then throughout the year, we'll be continuing to provide professional development to our staff. Just to review again, the DuPage County Public Health Department, they developed some metrics for school districts to help us with our decision-making process. And again, the DuPage County Public Health Department would never recommend what school districts should do, but just provide us with information so that we can make the best decision possible. They have 3 transmission levels minimum, moderate, and substantial, and then they have different criteria. And again, the way that the DuPage County Public Health Department is using this, and depending upon the metrics, they will indicate for school districts what the transmission level is. And then it just takes one indicator at the higher transmission level to move the county into that transmission level. So if there's one that's in the orange, then DuPage County is moderate. If there's one in the red, then DuPage County is substantial. In order to drop to a lower level, all the metrics have to be at that level for 2 weeks, and then it can drop But at the same time, if a metric bumps into the higher transmission level, then the county would move into the higher level. And so it's conservative in uh, responding when the transmission level improves, but it's not conservative when it moves to the higher level. Every Friday, the DuPage County Public Health Department is sharing with school districts what the transmission level is with the metrics that they're utilizing. And then in turn, the district will be sharing that information with our school community on Fridays as well after we receive it. The nice thing about the most recent data, and it's always a week behind. So this isn't necessarily Friday, September 4th, but it's the week prior. I think it was the 28th of August that this data is for. And as the one nice positive was the week prior, the number of new cases per 100,000 was at 96, and the last week it was at 75. The weekly case count trended down. The weekly youth less than 20 year olds case count is trending down. Unfortunately, the positivity rate is bumped up from 4.4% to 5.1%. And just a reminder that for the positivity or the new cases per 100,000, if that bumps above 100 per 100,000, that would move us from moderate to substantial. And then on the weekly test positivity rate, if it bounces above 8%, that would move us into the substantial rate. So we're watching those metrics. And again, everything everybody can do in their decision making can help us maintain our current rate of moderate. In terms of instructional models, what that means for school districts, when we're at the minimal transmission level, again, we're still using the protocols of 6 feet distancing, still would have masks, but the trying to maintain cohorts is less important at that level. The moderate level, which is what we're currently at, we can have transition to in-person learning. Again, we have to maintain 6 feet social distancing. We have to wear masks. And there's really a goal to try to not have mixing of groups. And so having small cohorts in the buildings, which is more of an elementary model. And then if you transition to the substantial, that's when it would be recommended, or rather the guidance would point towards remote learning. But at the same time, there is the opportunity to continue to bring in the small groups that are high risk to provide some support for those students. Again, this is kind of our transition plan. Currently, we're at phase 2. This week, we started bringing in small groups. And I'll reference this a little bit later, but the nice thing about bringing in the small groups before we bring in more students is we do start to see how the protocols are working for the district. We are starting, you start to see what the demands are on custodial maintenance services. And so we're better prepared for transitioning to hybrid. Next week, we'll be continuing with the small groups. And then phase 3, the weeks of September 27th and 28th, we'll continue to expand the targeted groups, and then also the number of days that we're providing support, with the goal of at the end of September, beginning of October, we transition to our hybrid model for our district. And again, all this is dependent upon the Illinois Department of Public Health, the DuPage County Public Health, and the metrics. As we're considering our transition, this is some of the information that we are considering, and we know that sometimes our community has questions as well. But for manning the junior high and the high school, we've been contacting families and finding out where they're at, their comfort level with remote versus hybrid. Those buildings are still staying between that 30 to 40%. are looking for remote learning, and then 60 to 70% in person. Miller, they're down to about 15% preferring the remote learning, and so 85% is in person. One of the things that, as the community looks at other school districts and other school districts models, unit districts are unique, and that presents unique challenges. You know, a high school district is just focused on learning for 9 to 12, elementary districts, pre-K through 8, and then a unit district is the whole gamut that we're trying to come up with models for. When you look at the moderate, what's required for the moderate transmission, it's very easy to see that early childhood and K-5, it might be easier to transition to a hybrid model because already, for the most part, those are self-contained classes. And so if you can maintain small classes, keep the students in the room, you're able to transition easier to hybrid model. I know one question is, you know, can the district look at possibly, if we think that we're ready for hybrid at the early childhood level or the K-5 level, would it be possible to transition to in person? And it is possible. The one thing, again, that when you're a unit district and you have unions that are representing employees that are at the secondary level, the elementary level, early childhood, then it comes down to working with those bargaining units and reaching agreement with those units as well. And so, you know, the challenge is when you have students in person at one level but not at another level, there can sometimes be a perceived inequity. And so it's working through those dynamics that end up being challenging when, again, you're a unit district. Currently, Manning and the junior high are updating their hybrid model. The Manning plan is attached, and they're looking at two different models, and part of it is whether or not we can do synchronous learning with both remote learners or in person. And there is some hesitation, I'll be honest, with the Teachers Association about having synchronous learning for remote learners. And so again, it's a discussion we're having, working through. John Jonak is talking to neighboring junior highs about their model. And he's actually visiting a junior high tomorrow, Gower Junior High, to take a look at their model. And he's going to make adjustments to his hybrid model, which, again, the goal of trying to minimize the mixing of students, the mixing of cohorts. Miller and the high school are going to maintain the models that they proposed during the summer. Right now, we are allowing small groups, and it is providing us with an opportunity to test some of our protocols. We're finding out how long it takes to do temperature checks and working through the reporting from parents that their children are COVID free. And so we're working through all those things so that when we transition to larger groups of students, we'll be more efficient and be able to do it more efficiently. The other thing too is that just starting with small groups, it's much easier to maintain social distance. We can maintain the cohorts, and we're less likely to have any type of an outbreak. And so that's why we're right now starting with the small groups and working through some of those things so that we can be better prepared for when we transition to a hybrid. The one thing I always like to remind our parents that they need to be aware of when we do transition to hybrid, that just a reminder, the IDPH guidelines requires schools to send home students who present any symptoms that are COVID-19 related. Now, the IDPH is supposed to be releasing some updated guidance with regards to the symptoms and how schools should respond. It was supposed to be coming out today prior to the board meeting. School district still had not received it, but once we receive that, that'll hopefully add some clarity and maybe make it a little bit more manageable. But one of the caveats, it's not just the student who presents symptoms, but any siblings in the family. And so parents need to be prepared that they could receive a call from a school saying that their child or children need to go home. In that instance, the child would need to be quarantined for a period of, I believe right now it's 10 days, or they have to be evaluated by a physician to determine that it's not COVID related. In the case where there's a identified case within a classroom, again, parents may need to be prepared for some children or need to be quarantined for 2 days. Again, that depends on how well that 6 feet of social distancing it's able to be maintained. Just knowing that would depend upon the age of the students or the needs of the students, it may be difficult. Even though we have as many safety precautions in place, it may not be possible. And so parents need to be aware that, again, that could be a situation that they need to face. Again, school won't be the same. Masks will be required. We'll be doing temperature checks. We'll be on social distancing. Many of the social aspects that we usually will see in schools and that students enjoy will probably not be present. And then there could be the possibility of schools having to pivot between in-person and remote. My daughter's a high school teacher, and their high school started with in-person, and currently they're on remote because they had a certain number of students were testing positive for COVID, staff members, and so they had to pivot to remote. Their plan is to try to pivot back to in-person, but again, our parents need to be aware that those are real possibilities. And so if we do make the transition to hybrid, it doesn't mean that we'll be able to stay hybrid for the remainder of the year. For what period of time we may be able to remain in hybrid. And so for some of our parents who are, with childcare may be an issue, they need to be aware of that. There are situations where their child may be having to be at home. Again, some of our decision drivers as we get closer to the end of September, the guidance from the CDC, IDPH, DuPage County Public Health, we're looking at that data. We're currently in the process of hiring additional staff so that we can fill some of those gaps. And then we're also, for the most part, we're able to work through some of the dynamics of what staff need to be remote versus what staff are available for in person. We're waiting on the updated junior high model and manning the lock-in on their model. I'm continuing to work with our bargaining groups so that there's a comfort level with us transition to hybrid. And then again, just a reminder to our families that the decisions they make outside of school can also impact the school opening. So again, if we're practicing outside of school, the same protocols that we will in school, social distancing, wearing a mask, washing hands frequently, if we're doing those things, then that hopefully will at least maintain the certain level, the current level of transmission in DuPage County, and we won't see an increase in level. And the other piece that we need to be aware of is transportation. We're currently working with Westway and Sunrise on our different models to make sure that we can get students transported to school. And they're in the process of rehiring drivers. And so we're working through that process as well. And that is, my information at this time. If there's any questions from the board that I can answer.
Question, this is Adina. With phase 2, well, actually phase 3, do you know the makeup of those groups or how they're decided that next
Sure. Those groups will be decided. Each of the buildings have data teams, and so they meet on a weekly basis, and they take a look at the students who are performing at grade level, and so they'll be looking at their students, and part of it will be the student engagement data. Some of it will be the achievement piece, and they'll be identifying students that they'll be bringing in for the small groups.
I have a quick question just about the parent surveys. I have quite a few questions, but I'm going to start
Sure.
with this one tonight. Just first of all, what was the response rate like for the parent surveys this time? Was it higher or lower than the initial survey? And then that's a pretty big change for the Miller families, as far as wanting 85% now wanting in person and only 15% wanting remote. Was there any indication of why that group in particular had more of a desire for in-person learning?
First to answer the first part A of the question, we are getting a higher response because the buildings are actually reaching out to families who haven't responded to get what their response is. When we went through it the first time, we just went with the families that responded, but now the buildings are actually reaching out, contacting families. So we're getting a much, much higher response rate. With Miller, I think the driver is the age of the students, being kindergarten and first grade, that there's more parent support is required of the children than they are at the older grade. So I think as parents are working through the remote learning experience, the challenges you have with younger children, I think that's the driver.
I'm gonna go ahead and ask one of my next questions, just because I think it piggybacks kind of off of your answer to that question about the age
Sure.
groups. And I know we've talked a little bit about this before, and you mentioned in this presentation of information how being a community unit school district presents a very unique challenge for us, because we're trying to develop a one-size-fits-all model for returning to school for very, very different buildings and very, very different circumstances. And so while I completely understand the WTA's, the perceived inequity of asking one group of teachers to be in the building and one group of teachers not to be in the building, I just think that it's worth breaking that conversation open a little bit more in these very, very unique circumstances that we've never experienced before. I know we don't want to create different models. That kind of goes against the unit school district approach. However, I think we might need to explore that a little bit, those conversations with the WTA, for a few reasons. First of all, those numbers are overwhelming for those little kids there and those parents. And I feel like for the younger age groups, we can follow that cohort model, number one, and we can't do that as easily at the high school level. There's also a lot of research that supports the fact that younger kids are not contracting or spreading COVID as much as older kids. I think there is an inability for the younger kids to complete the e-learning to the same level as older children. And so I think that if we want to talk about inequity, I think the younger kids are suffering a little bit more as far as the quality of their education. And then finally, I would argue too that the high school aged kids, their behaviors outside of the school building, I think, tend to be a little bit riskier also than younger kids. And so I think that as far as what the perception is, my perception is that a teacher who's with just this same small group of younger kids is not going to be in as much danger as far as a high school teacher necessarily. So I would just encourage some further conversation with the union, the Teachers Association about that.
Sure.
I have a question that is also related to comments you made regarding the Teachers Association. You said that there were concerns from the Teachers Association about the synchronous learning for remote and in-person. And I specifically looking at the model for elementary that Manning put forward for hybrid, there was an option A that had synchronous learning in the morning for in-person and remote, and then an option B where the morning was in-person and the afternoon was remote. And so I guess I'm just curious if you could explain a level deeper what the concerns were, and was it specifically with that Model A where both remote and in-person are taught at the same time using technology to kind of wire students in?
Sure. And that's, part of my conversation with the WTA is getting greater clarification. I think one of the pieces is that when you have, the groups, the students in the classroom, and then you have the student remotely, and if they're recording, the students in the classroom, there's, a concern there that some of the students have, if you remember, we asked parents if they want their children to be in pictures that possibly could be in the newspaper and those types of things. And so are you possibly creating a situation where you have students in person that the parents don't want them, to be in that type of a setting where, they're being viewed from the outside, if that makes sense. So that's some of it. I think there's other concerns that the teachers have that I need to ask the WTA and have them articulate exactly what the problems are and how we can rectify those, because I think the alternative is, if you look at model A, the nice piece there is the teacher is working synchronously both with the in-person students and the remote students, and then in the afternoon they're available to provide small group or individual support. If the teacher is being asked to do synchronous with in-person in the morning and then synchronous with remote learners in the afternoon, you're not afforded that opportunity. Plus, I think teachers will find that a little bit more intensive, and it's going to be much more difficult to sustain that model. So I'm hoping that in where their concerns truly lie, that we can problem solve that so that we can have a model that I think will work better for our students.
Yeah, thank you. I think the clarity on that will be really important.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I had was just if you could talk, you mentioned a little bit pivoting from remote to in-person and then potentially pivoting back. And I assume there's some challenges to that. Do you have any concerns about how we would go about that and what planning is being done to sort of help with those transitions, especially back into in-person now, which that's the first one we'll be facing?
Right. And, we're always going to try to give our families as much notice as possible, because I think that's key to when you pivot. Initially, our conversations with DuPage County Health Department, when they were kind of walking us through the metrics and how they envisioned schools, they've, fully anticipated that if on Friday the indicators were substantial transmission, that school districts on Monday would transition to remote. And we try to explain to the county health department that our families will need time, especially with childcare, to make that adjustment. And we kind of did it on the fly last March, we didn't have any control over that. But if this is something that we have a little bit more control over, then we would want to provide that opportunity. And so, to provide that communication. So the pivot to remote, I'm anticipating that there would be about a week notice for that. And then again, because of the requirement that the county has to be at the metrics have to be at the lower level for 2 weeks before they would, drop us back to moderate. That provides us, again, a 2-week window that we're communicating to families as to the anticipated day that we would transition back to in person. And so, our hope is that our metrics hold, that we're going to be able to start communicating next week the planned transition to in person, and then at the September 22nd board meeting, confirm that for parents so that they have adequate time to plan for those transitions.
Hey, Kevin, Leah here. So you mentioned the 2-week consecutive piece. Is that, that's for an increase in the youth cases and an increase in the cases overall? But is the weekly case rates over 100, does that need to be for 2 weeks consecutive in addition?
No, for the increase, those two metrics, they just have to go to the substantial level for that 1 week, and they'll bump up into the higher. Those two, though, have to be at the lower transmission level for 2 weeks before they'll drop the county to a lower level.
Okay, so, and my concern being that we were at 96 cases per 100,000, 2 weeks ago, and we
Right.
dropped back in the 70s. But if that 96 was 4 more cases, would that have made this not an option?
It would have bumped up to substantial, and we probably would be looking at pushing out the start date for hybrid at that point. It wouldn't necessarily take it completely off the table, but we may not have been looking at the end of September.
Okay. And so if that were to happen again, we get into October, we get over 100 for a week, we pull out?
We'd give our families a week to make the adjustment, but then my recommendation would be that yes, we would transition back to remote.
And that would be the same for the weekly test positivity rate, because that one's also not a consecutive. That's if we're just over 8%, then we give our parents a week notice and we pull back until we're back in line.
Correct.
Okay. And then so thank you for clarifying those metrics, because I know that was a little, I found that a little bit confusing.
Sure.
Can you clarify, or do we know, so I know you mentioned that Miller was at 15% for hybrid. What are the other schools at now that we have a fuller picture as far as like a percentage of hybrid versus in person?
They're trending right around 35 to 36%, which is kind of where they've always been. They've been in that 30 to 40% range.
Okay, so we didn't see a significant difference for Manning, the junior high or the high school, but we did see that Miller change pretty significantly.
Right.
Okay, and then can you help me understand? I understand the inequity piece with the different schools being open, and I think Jess said it pretty exceptionally well, that that inequity piece of safety for our teachers at the high school level, if they were in person. Arguably, yes, our high school students, their behavior outside of schools is a little bit riskier, or perceived to be. So can you help me understand, how are the students able to do the small groups now in relation to the Westmont Teachers Association? Like how are they maybe not necessarily in relation, but how is that okay right now that we're able to do the small groups right now with our kids with IEPs, and that we can make that happen, but we can't make the younger grades happen in the junior high. So how is that different?
Well, when you're talking to small groups right now, you're talking 10 to 12 students in the building at a time, which is again much more manageable for the social distancing piece, for even temperature checks and all those different things that have to be in place. So again, it's a very small number of students. When you start to bring in, when you shift to the hybrid model, you're looking at, 12 to 14 students per classroom. And so just the numbers alone, and the probability of transmission increases with that. And that's where the perceived inequity comes, is if you have students in person in a building, there's greater likelihood of transmission versus if there are no students in a building. And so it's, teachers look at it as their health is at greater risk. But again, with just bringing in the small groups, it's a much smaller number of students that you have in the building.
So that's why it works for right now.
Right.
So if there's 10 to 12 students in a building, are we talking about one teacher is working with one student or two students, or are we talking about a teacher is working with those 10 to 12 at the same time? Like what's the teacher student
right
ratio?
It's right, it's pretty much one-on-one in those instances.
Okay, and then I think I did have a question about that synchronous, asynchronous, working things out. Would those videos of the classroom be secured in the same way? So I know when we signed, if we wanted our students to be seen on video or not, or on pictures or not, that was specifically for, or it seemed, I perceived it to be for public consumption, like a open to the public consumption. But I don't perceive those Zoom asynchronous lessons to be publicly consumed, because you need the link to get to them. Would those be the same? Is that what we're thinking about?
The issue is if it's my understanding is when it's remote synchronous happening with in-person synchronous, that there's the opportunity for somebody recording it, sharing it, versus the asynchronous. There are other students are not involved. You don't have the in-person class students involved, and so it's a little bit in terms of the privacy, it's different.
So the concern is with a student who could be watching it, recording it?
Right.
And we can't control that through our district devices?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And then Laura had asked about the A model and the B model, that B model with the teachers teaching in person in the morning and then teaching same lessons in the afternoon, that would be difficult to maintain, which I tend to agree with, but it sounds like that might be more possible, or is that more what the teachers and the staff are they preferring that B model that might be more challenging to sustain, or are they preferring that A model, that we figure out how to make that A model work?
The A model is what we're hoping for and we're working towards. The B model is one that we're more confident we can get agreement on.
Okay, and then the last question I had was, we had talked at the last meeting about the high school adjusting for their cohorts to stay together more. Is there a reason that didn't change?
When they looked at the number of students they have in the building and the number of passing periods, it's a minimal amount of close contact that would occur during the day, and so we feel that that model is one that we'd be able to do. At the same time, it'd be low risk.
Because you're thinking, what was it, 200 students in the building at a time, in the entire building at a time?
Correct.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
And then I have a follow-up question about the cohorts. So from my understanding, and just looking for a correction, for the grades 2nd through 5th, and then with the junior high, the cohorts, the groups of kids were remaining in the same group and not changing classes. Is that correct? And is that different for the high school?
Yes, the high school, and even the junior high do a little bit. The high school, the way a high school schedule works, it's like the same group of 12 students don't have the exact same schedule all day. So every time the bell rings, the students get up, they move to a new class, and they have a new group of classmates. And so that's why at the high school, it's a little bit more challenging versus at the elementary level, the students are already in self-contained classes.
Just looking again with Jess making a statement about
Sure.
Being able to cohort your groups of students at those grade levels, and maybe not as much, but for the majority for the junior high, able with their ability to go back to in-person and maintaining cohorts. Again, something to address to the WTA again, that we,
Sure.
At that level, we're maintaining a large level of safety. So.
Kevin, can I ask another question about synchronous and asynchronous for the high school model? Just for clarification, it's group A on campus, group B remote learning. That remote learning would be asynchronous, right? Not synchronous?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then what happens if there's a student in group A who needs to quarantine and they need to be remote? How will they get their in-person lessons?
They would probably receive them asynchronously until their quarantine was over.
Okay. Has there been any discussion of making synchronous available? Just, maybe they, video stream or something into the class just to see the teacher. Just those students, not the group B students, but just, to
Sure.
ensure that they get that material that they would have gotten in person.
Sure. And that's, again, that's something that we're working through with the WTA.
Great.
Because that's the same issue then that we would have at the elementary level.
Okay.
Just to clarify with the high school plan. So right now, high school students receive synchronous education every day, except for Wednesdays. Maybe they do on Wednesdays.
Correct. Not Wednesday.
And so if we move to a hybrid model for high school, there'll be less synchronous education with a hybrid model because they'll just receive 2 days of synchronous and the rest of the time will be independent work. Do I have a correct understanding there?
Yes.
This is the hard thing about a unit district because it's inequitable to students depending on which building they're in, and different students have different needs, different
Right.
ages have different needs. But I less like hybrid for high school in this particular circumstance. Can I clarify, you had mentioned for Manning, so the Plan A versus Plan B. I assumed Plan A was the preferential choice, and you confirmed that. But I'm curious on why, as a layperson, not in education at all, what are the advantages to Plan A? I read Plan B and I was like, this is it.
Right.
But I'm sure I'm missing some things there, so.
Well, with Plan A, there's the opportunity for teachers to support students either individually in small groups in the afternoon, and you lose that opportunity in the B model because those teachers would be involved in remote learning, and they wouldn't be available for the small group or individual work.
But in a traditional school day, students that need small group or individual intervention would be pulled out by our special ed teachers or by a reading specialist or a math specialist. So during a regular non-COVID time, teachers wouldn't have an opportunity to pull kids out one-on-one or in small groups anyway.
It depends. It depends on the student and the student's needs. Right now,
Okay.
like if we were in person and we had our typical number of minutes of instruction, teachers do have the opportunity. They differentiate their instruction, and the students are working in small groups, and that provides the teacher with opportunities then to work with individual students or small groups within the context of that class. But during the remote or in-person learning with the abbreviated schedule, the block of time is shorter, so the teacher doesn't have that opportunity. It's more whole group instruction, and then the afternoon would provide the opportunity for the teacher to work in the small groups with students in the A model.
So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So what are we utilizing the interventionists elsewhere? I think is maybe to clarify. Are we utilizing the interventionists elsewhere in the Plan B model to support different things so that they wouldn't be able to pull out the AM kids in the PM or the PM kids in the AM?
It's not every student requires the need to work with an interventionist. Some students just need a little bit of extra support from their classroom teacher. And again, in a typical class, in a typical school day, when we were running our normal school day, teachers had that opportunity within that class period to provide that additional support. So it's not the student necessarily that gets pulled out for intervention, but there are some students that their level necessarily that they require an interventionist, but rather they need just from their classroom teacher a little additional support. And so if we're able to do the A model, then the classroom teacher would be able to provide the additional support. And the interventionists are working with those students who have greater needs.
Just, can I stick on a follow-up question with Manning's plan in particular? So Miller's was very clear that most students want to be in a hybrid situation, but Manning was 60-40. And so I know that the way we staff school buildings is very complicated and different needs. It's very complicated, but 40% of students staying remote, is there ability to have remote-only teachers?
That's why, if you remember when it was the August 25th board meeting, Manning's needs are different than Miller's for additional personnel. And so we're hiring additional staff from Manning to help support both the in-person and remote. that we don't need the additional personnel for Miller.
Is the need different at each grade level at Manning? Second, third, fourth, and fifth?
I'd have to check that to be sure.
Okay. As far as
But I
remote
think- I
versus
think it's
hybrid,
pretty-
because I thought
Right.
I thought I heard somewhere that the second grade had a significant change in request for hybrid.
I need to confirm that.
I think that would be
And-
interesting to confirm, Kevin, because I kind of assumed, looking at the AB models, that A was preferred because there might be a variance in the percent of children or percent of families who want in-person in certain grades. And so therefore, you know, making the decision to split morning and afternoon might not be the best utilization of
Sure.
teacher time.
Yeah.
If there's a grade that only has, you know, 10% or 15% that are doing remote. So it would be interesting to clarify that for us
Sure.
for the next conversation.
Yeah, and those second graders have a different, you know, they're almost much more on par with the kindergarten and the first graders as far as their learning style and their requirement for parental support, speaking as the mom of a second grader. You know, what they need when I think about second grade is much more on par with kindergarten and first grade than third, fourth, fifth grade as far as support is concerned. So that I'd be interested also in seeing those numbers, hybrid versus in-person per grade level.
Sure.
Because it does seem like A's like, yeah, go on.
And then I just read with Manning, speaking of Manning, I read the summary. It seems like a emphasis was put on teachers maintaining their students. So if you go to hybrid, I guess with the previous plan, is it right that there would be a remote teacher, and then
Right.
that hybrid in-person teacher would be different? So how much is that a part of these plans too? They're trying to do away with different teachers for remote and in-person.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah. B seems. It seems a bit overcomplicated. I don't know. I'm having trouble understanding. A seems so so much easier and potentially more natural, especially if we talk about hopping into school and out of school and into school and out of school, which very well could happen this year. So I struggle with understanding why B is the preference, because it seems like B is harder.
A is the preference.
Okay. But for the teaching staff, I thought B was the preference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think so.
Yeah, that's not an easy question to answer. There's I think some teachers are in favor of A, but not necessarily all teachers. And so it's working through the logistics with the WTA.
Can I ask this question about Plan A? Is it, do you know if the teachers are at all concerned with, you know, if I'm teaching my students in the classroom and then I have all of my remote students, like how am I supposed to engage with them and engage with the students? And, you know, is classroom management part of the concern there, that like they're trying to take care of these kiddos at home, but then try to pay attention to the kids in the classroom? Has that been part of the conversation at all? Is that why there might be some resistance from teachers?
There is that conversation, and we're utilizing our teacher assistants to assist with that as well. But there is a way with how you set up your Zoom screen that you're able to monitor the students that are remote and also in person. But we'd also utilize our teaching assistants to assist with that as well.
Great.
Can I clarify about the survey? So there's only Miller and Manning data listed on your memo. Was the survey taken for junior high and high school?
At the junior high, they've been surveying. The high school has not been surveying.
Okay. And can you help, and maybe this is a better question for next meeting, maybe when we're talking about the differences at Manning across grade levels, but how the additional staff will be utilized. So some of the staff that we agreed to hire last time, like custodial staff, that's pretty transparent, but I guess how they'll be utilized.
Sure.
And are all schools bringing in small groups of students right now?
The junior high is on hold, but the other buildings are.
Is it just as I know we're just starting this week. Is there a plan over the next month to bring in small groups at the junior high? Or is there?
Yes.
Okay.
They'll be starting next week. Part of it was the logistics of figuring out transportation for the students. And then also, John wanted another week to plan for the students coming in.
I can really see how that is a beneficial, even though it might be 10 students in the whole building, just a very beneficial logistics workout into helping us if we slowly transition in to smaller groups becoming slightly larger as we move towards hybrid.
What are the, do you have an update on what the neighboring districts are doing? Because I got used to seeing your updates every week or every other week. So do we have that?
It's pretty much the same as it was at the last meeting. The only difference now is, and I can put this together for the next meeting, one districts are hoping to transition to hybrid. And it's kind of all over the board. Some are targeting as we are at the beginning of October. Some are targeting the end of the first quarter. There's a couple that are waiting until the semester, but I can put that together. One district are anticipating transitioning.
Okay, I thought I had heard something about the Wheaton district, that's a unit district, being back in session already for the younger kids, which I'd be interested.
Yeah, they are. Wheaton is bringing in their pre-K through 5, but then remote for the high school, junior high.
And they are a unit district like we are.
They're a unit district like we are. The one difference is they're a larger unit district, so they're actually repurposing staff from the junior high and high school at the elementary level to help them bring the kids in person.
Okay, and that is not an option for us?
We have a smaller staff at the junior high and high school, so it would be difficult to repurpose staff and still maintain a quality remote learning experience. Like I'll give you an example. We have at our high school, you might have one teacher who's teaching, chemistry and physics. Well, you can't really pull that person if they're certified. Then they have to have the licensure to go to the lower level and still maintain teaching for chemistry and physics.
So if I were to compare and contrast surrounding districts, who or what district is the most like us as far as size?
Lyle.
Okay, and what are they doing?
Lyle's currently in remote, and I have to double check it, but their target date is later in October that they want to transition.
And Lyle is a unit district?
Yes.
Similar size?
Yes.
It's uncanny how similar we are.
Okay.
I mean, our population of Title I students, it's very, very similar.
Okay. And they are projected to be back later than we are?
Yes, I believe so.
Mm-hmm. Are they having the same challenges with staffing?
Yes.
Okay.
They were I don't know if you remember the board meeting August 4th when we made our decision to go remote. They had put out there that they were also transitioning to remote, and a lot of it had to do with the staffing issues.
And maybe this is not the time to ask, but do we have an update on those staffing concerns, or are you going to fill us in later, or is now the time?
I'll right now we're in pretty good shape as far as staffing. And so, you know, we're in the process of hiring, so we're able to work through those issues.
Okay, so we're working through staffing, which was a major concern with getting back in person, at least for as many students as would like to be in person. So what are the other, if any, major concerns that we have or barriers that we have between now and, call it October 8th? I don't even know what day of the week that is. I'm literally just pulling a day in early October. What are the major barriers that we have between having the students that want to be in person at school? What are the barriers to having that happen?
You know, some of the hesitation barrier revolves around just you know, people's anxiety. You know, as we start to approach this week when we're going to bring small groups in, you know, there's definitely greater concern from staff. You know, they're very hesitant. You know, there's a lot of anxiety, and so part of it is just, you know, working with people and working through their anxieties and trying to maintain as safe an environment as possible. I mean, that's really the bottom line. You know, the individuals who have, you know, documented reasons that they should not be in person, we're working through those issues. But even for the individuals who, you know, don't meet one of the criteria, there's a lot of anxiety about resuming in person, you know. And, you know, some of we talked about this, even, you know, what we know about the virus changes, it seems like, week to week. And I know, Jess, you referenced the studies that, you know, children don't necessarily transmit the virus or contract the virus. And, you know, now there's studies that are saying that, you know, children may be asymptomatic, but they're, you know, they can transmit the virus just as, you know, rapidly, I guess, as adults or teens. And so it's some of those things, you know, everybody wants to point to a study, you know, why we should be able to do something or why we can't do something. And so it's just trying to work through all those issues. I mean, that's probably the biggest challenge.
And Kevin, I just want to make sure for the public's, those are the challenges that we can try to address. On your decision drivers slide of your presentation, I mean, there are challenges that we can't address and have no control over. So those are the barriers that we can try to address. You know, hiring the staff, trying to make sure we have everything in place to make everybody feel as safe as possible. But as I look at the decision drivers slide, you know, it's apparent there are some things outside of our control. So, you know, I guess it's a good question that Leah asked, because there were conversations in parent groups about what can we do to help ensure that schools can go back in person. And, you know, conversations about sharing the posts for the positions to be hired, You know, but the reality is sharing the posts, trying to support whatever the administration needs right now, and also doing your part in terms of safety, wearing your masks, washing your hands, trying to stay distanced. Is there anything, Kevin, you would add to that list for this community who desperately wants to help solve this problem?
You know, I don't think there is, you know. Like you said, you know, the things that we can control are the things we're working on, but then, as you mentioned, there are some that are outside of our control, and those things we can't address.
Okay.
I think it is helpful, and I, you know, kind of seen your slide that just lists like the trends and values. I think that's helpful for parents, any parent to see at any time, you know, if they want to say what happened last week, where we are now. Because it does help to answer and I think relieve some anxieties. Is, you know, there's going to be ups and downs, but to see,
Right,
okay,
right.
this is trending downward, you know, I feel better about, you know, our cases per 100,000. So I do like that chart you have. And I think it should be made something that should be put out there so parents can have that and see, because it's going to change week to week.
Yes,
So
it
we're
will.
not going to, we can't change those numbers, but seeing them, I think is helpful.
Maybe in that COVID handbook, perhaps.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
At the top.
Well, every Friday I'll share the updated, you know, data, and we'll have it on our website.
Yeah, it's nice to see a trend. I know I see a spreadsheet and I'm like, oh, let's make a bigger spreadsheet. It's my initial reaction. Let me track the numbers for the last 4 weeks and 8 weeks upcoming. That's definitely, but having that information out there, potentially front and center, the things that we can't necessarily control, but we can certainly support. I just want to make sure that the community is heard, because we have a fair amount of private schools. We have some private schools very close to us that are in school, and it is seen. And I think the community is looking for some reassurance that our kids are going to get in school this year, especially at all grade levels. I can only speak from the youngest grade levels, but I just want to. I'm not sure that the community is feeling that it's being seen, and it doesn't necessarily understand why can the private schools be in session and we cannot. Why can we bring in small groups of kids and we can't bring in all the kindergartners? And those are very hard questions to answer. But I think people are trying to decide, you know, kind of what they're going to do this year.
Sure.
I did have a follow-up on the financials, Kim, and it's tied into this. I think you mentioned it like 2 months ago. Is there any adjustment to our funding from children disenrolling in the district for the school year? If you were to homeschool part-time or full-time, does that adjust our funding from the state on a per-child basis?
Not at this time. So right now we're in a hold harmless position. I don't know if that could impact us going forward. But one of the things too, some of our grants, so Title I, things like that are based on certain populations. So there could be some change to those and the amount of funding we receive. But again, if those grants change and we receive less money, then we just spend less money. So
Is that hold harmless? Is that a state mandate?
It's part
Is
of
that
our evidence-based funding, and it's based on we receive a certain dollar amount based on when it went into effect a few years ago, And so we're hold harmless, so we're not supposed to receive less than we did at a certain date and time. But again, you know,
Is that because of our budgetary challenges?
no. It's based on when they changed the model, they said no school district will get less than they had gotten as of a certain date.
Okay.
And so potentially the way the model changed, we could have gotten less money, but the state said, no, we're going to give you this same allocation year after year, so you don't dip below the resources that we've allocated to you. Now, again, there's nothing to say that the state won't change some of this, again, given their economics. So it's really hard to tell. But in terms of right now, the enrollment is not, like, I can't predict what that would do.
Okay, but the hold harmless is not in relation to COVID. It is.
No.
Okay.
No, it's a funding mechanism.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
So I think I really like what Laura said about focusing on what's in our control and what's not in our control. And I think that all parents and staff and admin and administrators, everyone is grieving this school year and how difficult this is, and looking into the winter season and how difficult that is going to be. And those are things that are not in our control. But what is in our control is some of the things that we talked about. So we talked about being flexible and maybe looking at our unit district in a different way, that we've looked at it before. Working with our teachers to provide systems and protocols where everyone feels as safe as they can, and really articulating that very clearly and providing training on that, using this small group time to perfect our protocols and be fluid and change them as we need to. Working with our unions to hear them and working with our public to hear our parents and our community and adjusting as needed. But ultimately, if we do hybrid in October or not, depending on how the state looks, there's likely going to be some back and forth, back to remote and back to hybrid using the state model. And that's really difficult. I was talking with another parent the other week, and I was like, you know what? We'll get into hybrid and we'll be really sad about that too, because it won't be the same. And the kindergarten teachers can't help tie the shoe and give the hug and help in the bathroom and all the things that are normal. And what we really, truly want is to go back to normal and for this to all be done. But that's not our reality. So how can we as a school board encourage our district to move forward most solidly with the things that are in our control, knowing that this is not what anybody wants, any of hybrid, remote, anything. So I think we're also, one of the things that are in our control is getting more information. So understanding what our teachers' concerns really are, understanding what our barriers are, understanding what's happening in different schools and different districts and what their plans are, I think would be helpful for us as we move to our next meeting.
Just to clarify though, if everything stays the same with the metrics, and we're looking at, the metrics are for all of Illinois, for DuPage County, for the school district? Can you clarify that first?
Metrics are for DuPage County.
So that's what we're going to follow to dictate what happens in the school district, all of DuPage
Correct.
County? Okay.
Right.
So just to clarify, if nothing changes between now and October 5th, we're going to hybrid in all of the schools. That's where we're at right now?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions about this particular topic? I know we'll be visiting it again at our next meeting, so if you don't have anything urgent, I suggest kind of taking a pause and we'll bring it back at our following meeting. If not, then let's move forward with the junior high school fine arts discussion item.
So at the last board meeting, we had some public comment about the junior high fine arts, junior high band program. And so I talked to John Jonak, the high school principal, and he put together a memo for the board. But essentially, John wanted to point out that, it's not that the band program isn't a priority. It is a priority. The intent is to have a robust band program this year. It was just the timing of the resignation and with trying to get the school year open as we were, pivoting to remote learning that, John prioritized getting the building open, but he is in the process of reviewing the posting. He is going to get that posted, and we will bring in a high quality band director to maintain our band program at the junior high.
Okay, any comments, questions about that topic? Okay, thank you. Final discussion item is policy first reading.
And the policy committee met and reviewed several policies, and so they're presented today as a first reading. Unless you were really diligent over the weekend, you may not have had a chance to review all these, but you do have time between now and the next board meeting, the 22nd, and then the policies will be presented for second reading and adoption by the board, and then the policy manual will be updated accordingly. For the most part, the policies, the changes were pretty minor, and the committee didn't have any issue with recommending them moving forward for the first reading.
So just FYI for people looking at this for the first time, the ones that say under reviewed that say footnotes, that basically means the only thing that changed was something in the footnotes. So if you're going through them and want a shortcut, that's a good way to shortcut.
Thank you for that.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Or Joel, do you mind just explaining
I was just gonna.
why
I was
we
just gonna
make
ask.
changes to the policy? So there's a process that we use. What's that process?
So generally, the School Board Association has attorneys that work on this kind of collaboratively, and they come up with recommended changes to school policies. And you'll see, if you go to different districts' websites, you will see policies are strikingly familiar, to our own, based on that, because they have a whole team of attorneys that reviews these things. They review current case law and things that might cause changes to policy based on legal rulings and that sort of thing, or new legislation and new laws that are passed, and make recommendations, and then they send them out quarterly to the districts for review and implementation if you choose to do so. Now, it's the board's prerogative to make changes to policies if they want to. Generally, if you do that, that also then gets run through your own school attorney, and they look to see that your changes make sense legally and keep in the spirit of the policy in general. So oftentimes we end up adopting the recommended policies. We just review them, we talk about them at the policy meeting, and then we bring them to the full board for another review, and then we'll be voting on them next meeting.
So I just noticed like a whole bunch of adjustments in language, changing, one word to another word. That's what I kind of seem to notice through most of it. So then at the next board meeting, are we actually going to read these, or we will read them on our own and then we approve the changes as, okay, cool.
Yeah, you would. Yeah, we're not going to go through them one by one unless somebody has a specific question about it. Then you have an opportunity to ask or seek clarification on that. But other than that, we're just looking for approval. And yeah, you're right. A lot of the times the changes are, they change an acronym or something,
Yeah.
and then that gets carried over in multiple policies because the policies are all intertwined and relate to each other, or many of them are, and so you'll see a series of 5 changes, and they're all the same type of a change.
Okay,
And that,
thank you.
And that's how that process works. So they'll be back next meeting, so Feel free to review those in advance. We have one action item, and that is waiver of swim class graduation requirement for the 2020-2021 school year.
This is a recommendation from the administration with the onset of COVID-19 and some of the guidelines we've been provided. For instance, not having students use locker rooms. That makes having a swim program a little bit more difficult because typically students would change in and out of their swimsuits. But we're not able to do that. And so the recommendation from the high school is to change the graduation requirement from a quarter of swim to a quarter of PE swim, so that our seniors will be able to meet the graduation requirements for this year.
Okay, does anyone have any further question or comments on that particular item? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the local CUSD 201 quarter swim class graduation requirement to be waived for students who were scheduled to take it during the 2020-2021 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Can we get a roll call, please?
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Redonio?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Coyle?
Yes.
Ms. Stromeyer?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next item, superintendent's report.
And so typically we provide you with the 6-day enrollment. And so I provided that as part of my report. And you see there the enrollment in June of 2020, and then where we're starting enrollment in August of 2020 for each grade level on the 6th day. And then the change from June, you know, for instance, kindergarten in June, we had 104. Well, those students are now in first grade. And so the comparison is first grade in August to kindergarten in June. And so that's how you get the change in the number of students. And as you can see, across the board, we're a little bit lower in our enrollment. And that's in part, you know, it's twofold. In some cases, we always have some students who move over the course of the summer, and that's not related to COVID-19 at all. We've had some students who have opted to homeschool. We've had some students who have opted to go to a private school. And so that is what accounts for the lower number of students. Are there any questions on that? And then the last thing I had under communications, I asked Shannon to put this in your black folders. We've set our committees, and so I'm in the process of identifying dates for each of the committees. The policy committee, we've talked about going through each section of the policy manual, starting with section 1 to make sure that our policies are up to date compared to what press has. And so I've, hopefully you're okay with this, I've established a meeting a month in which we would take each section of the policy manual, and I would provide for you any policies that need to be tweaked, that we would need to make adjustments to. And then I know last time Friday 8 o'clock worked, so if that doesn't work, we can adjust those dates and times. The other ones I provided for you is finance and facilities, and what happens there is, for our new board members, you'll find this out. But again, the finance, the financial calendar is cyclical. And so, for instance, in our next board meetings, Kim will be presenting the budget for final approval. And so typically we would have a finance committee prior to that, so that Kim can share any adjustments that have been made to the tentative budget prior to the board approval. And then in December, Kim presents the levy for the board to approve. In January, we start our budgeting staffing timeline, and so we would have a finance committee meeting then. And then as we get towards the summer and Kim is presenting the tentative budget, we'd have a finance committee. With new board members on committees, we have to determine what times work best for board members. And so Kim and I will be working with the committee members to determine that. With the facility committee, it's similar to that. As Kim mentioned, we're working with Steve Cashman on a couple of projects. And so we would have a facility committee meeting to review that information with them before the September 22nd board meeting. And then as we work through the process and as we start to identify capital outlay projects for the upcoming summer, then there's facility committee meetings in order to take a look at the 5-year capital outlay plan for the district, updating that, and then identifying and prioritizing projects for the upcoming summer. And so again, with those committee members, Kim and I will be finalizing the dates and times. And then I'm still working on for strategic plan and public relations, the dates for those meetings. And that's my report.
All right, thank you. Are there any board reports?
I just really quickly wanted to highlight the change in the USDA food policy that now allows all families to receive food from our district. And I think I've had a lot of parent questions about, if I come and get food, am I taking food from someone else who needs it more, or does it cost the district money if I take food? And the answer, Kim can correct me, is no, it doesn't cost the district money, and you're not taking food away from any child. So I know that people's financial situations can change with COVID quickly, and so we would encourage everyone, regardless of income, to take advantage of that. So no, as a dietitian, I don't want any child to be hungry. I actually picked up food today for my own kids, and there's fruits and vegetables and whole grains and milk, and it's just really important that we can reduce the stigma around that so that all kids can make sure to get good, healthy food during this crazy time. So please don't hesitate to utilize that service. And you know, if your kids are like mine and they're eating all day long, it can be very helpful. And that program is expanded until December, is that correct?
Yeah, through the end of December.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Once a week?
Yeah, we'll have distribution right now. It depends, again, on the number. It may change, and there'll be updates on the website. But right now, once a week, and you'll receive 5 meals, 5 breakfast, 5 lunch on that particular day. If the volume grows, we may have to, do multiple days. We might switch to a morning, but we're just kind of right now seeing what participation looks like and making adjustments.
And one other question I got, sorry, was if you have to sign up for the meals ahead of time, and right now you don't, and it took me like 90 seconds to pick up the food. So it's a easy peasy process for families. The staff did an excellent job today.
Okay, very good. Anything else? Any public comment? Nope. Okay. Future events and meetings. We have the Westmont Junior High School Picture Day in the gym September 9th from 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. and that's at the junior high. Junior high school back to school night, also September 9th, 5:30 to 7. And junior high school virtual curriculum night, September 10th, 6 to 7:30. The Miller virtual curriculum night and questions and answers is September 15th, from 6 to 7:30. And our next school board meeting is September 22nd. Okay, so we're at the point to reconvene in closed session if we need to. And so, board members, I guess I would like to know, do you want to convene closed session to discuss the personnel matter we were kind of started, or do you want to carry that over to the next meeting?
I think it's getting pretty late, almost at 9 o'clock. I'd like to carry it over to the next meeting, please.
Okay.
I agree.
agree.
Yeah.
Okay, we will be carrying over that topic, so Dana, since it was kind of, you want to
Yeah.
remind me about that one, and
Yeah.
we'll make sure.
Do you want me to
it's on.
pull some materials for you for that meeting?
If they're appropriate to the discussion,
Yeah.
you know, you can, and then we can have that discussion at the next meeting. Okay. In that case, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting adjourned.